I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who would have to choose between keeping the peace and protecting my daughter. But sometimes life forces your hand, and you realize that silence isn't golden, it's complicit. My name is Sarah, and I'm about to tell you a story that still keeps me awake some nights. It's about my 11-year-old daughter, Emma, my sister Lisa, my mother, and the moment I finally found my voice, after 38 years of being told to keep quiet. But before I tell you what happened to Emma, I need you to understand the family I grew up in, because what happened that night at the talent show wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of patterns that I'd been too scared to break. I was 5 years old when I first remember feeling like I wasn't enough. It was Christmas morning, 1992, and I'd been practicing a little poem for weeks to recite for our extended family. I can still remember standing in our living room in Grand Rapids, Michigan, my hands shaking as I started to speak. Jingle bells, jingle all the way, I began, my small voice barely above a whisper, but before I could finish the second line, my 8-year-old sister Lisa jumped up from the couch. "Oh, I know a better version," she announced, and launched into a much longer, more elaborate Christmas poem that she'd apparently memorized just for this moment. Everyone clapped and praised Lisa's performance. My grandmother picked her up and spun her around, calling her our little actress. Meanwhile, I stood there frozen, my poem forgotten, watching my moment disappear. "Sarah, honey, you can go next," my mother said absent-mindedly. But by then, everyone was talking about Lisa's performance, asking her where she'd learned such a beautiful poem. I slipped away to my bedroom and never recited my poem. That was the first time I learned that in our family, there was only room for one star, and Lisa had claimed that position long before I was old enough to compete. The pattern continued throughout our childhood. When I made the honor roll in 3rd grade, Lisa had already made it in kindergarten. When I learned to ride a bike, Lisa reminded everyone that she'd been riding without training wheels since she was 4. When I got my first lead in the school play, Lisa casually mentioned that she'd gotten 3 leads by the time she was my age. My mother never seemed to notice the competition, or maybe she just chose not to see it. She'd smile and nod when Lisa made her comparisons, sometimes even adding her own commentary. "Lisa has always been so naturally gifted," she'd say. "Some children just have that special something." The implication was clear. I wasn't one of those children. By the time I was in high school, I'd learned to make myself smaller. I stopped trying out for plays, stopped raising my hand in class, stopped sharing my achievements at home. It was easier to fly under the radar than to risk being compared to Lisa and found wanting. I remember the day I got accepted to Michigan State University with a partial scholarship for academic merit. I was so excited that I ran all the way home from school, clutching the acceptance letter in my sweaty palm. "Mom, Mom," I shouted as I burst through the front door. "I got into state, and I got a scholarship." My mother looked up from folding laundry, a smile spreading across her face. For a moment, I thought this might be different. This might be my moment to shine. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," she said, reaching for the letter. But before she could even finish reading it, Lisa appeared in the doorway. "What's all the shouting about?" Lisa asked. She was home from her first year at Northwestern, looking sophisticated in her college sweatshirt and perfectly styled hair. "Sarah got into Michigan State," my mother said, handing Lisa the letter. Lisa scanned it quickly, then smiled that smile I knew so well, the one that looked supportive, but somehow made me feel smaller. "That's great, Sarah," she said. "State's a good school. Not as competitive as Northwestern, of course, but still good. And a partial scholarship is nice. I got a full ride, but every little bit helps, right?" Just like that, my achievement was diminished, qualified, made smaller to fit Lisa's narrative of superiority. My mother nodded along, as if Lisa's comparison was perfectly reasonable. "Lisa did get that full scholarship," she said. "But this is still wonderful news, Sarah." I took the letter back and went to my room. I should have been celebrating, but instead I felt that familiar hollow feeling in my chest. The feeling that no matter what I accomplished, it would never be quite enough. I went to Michigan State, majored in elementary education, and met my husband David during senior year. David was everything my family wasn't: supportive, encouraging, genuinely excited about my successes, without needing to compare them to anyone else's. When I told him about my childhood, about the constant comparisons and subtle put-downs, he was appalled. "That's not normal, Sarah," he said one night, as we sat in his dorm room, sharing a pizza and talking about our family. Families are supposed to build each other up, not tear each other down. But it wasn't malicious. I found myself defending them, the way I always did. Lisa didn't mean to make me feel bad. She was just confident. David looked at me with those kind brown eyes of his. Confident people don't need to put others down to feel good about themselves. What Lisa did was competitive and cruel, even if she didn't realize it. But old patterns die hard. Even after David and I got married, even after we moved to Ohio and started our own family, I still found myself seeking my mother's and Lisa's approval. I still shared our good news with them, hoping this time might be different. When Emma was born, I thought maybe the cycle would break. Maybe becoming grandmothers would soften them, make them more generous with their love and attention. For a while it seemed like it might. My mother was delighted with her first grandchild, and Lisa, who had struggled with fertility issues, seemed genuinely thrilled to be an aunt. They visited often, showered Emma with gifts, and filled our photo albums with pictures of themselves holding her. But as Emma grew older and her personality began to emerge, I started to see familiar warning signs. Emma was 3 when she first sang Happy Birthday at her own party, standing on a chair in our kitchen, her little voice clear and sweet. Everyone clapped and cheered, and Emma beamed with pride. "She's going to be a performer," my friend Janet said. "Look at that confidence." I felt a surge of maternal pride, but then I caught the look that passed between my mother and Lisa. It was subtle, just a quick glance, but I recognized it. It was the same look they'd exchanged countless times during my childhood whenever I showed signs of stepping into the spotlight. "Well, she's certainly not shy," my mother said with a laugh that sounded forced. "We'll have to make sure all that attention doesn't go to her head." Emma was too young to understand the implications, but I felt that old familiar knot form in my stomach. They were already starting to see her confidence as a problem to be managed rather than a gift to be celebrated. Over the next few years, the comments became more frequent and more pointed. When Emma won her first spelling bee in 2nd grade, Lisa made sure to mention that spelling had always been more about memorization than real intelligence. When Emma scored her first goal in soccer, my mother worried aloud that she might become too competitive and hurt other children's feelings. Every achievement was met with a qualifier. Every moment of joy was tempered with a warning about humility and consideration for others. But Emma, unlike me at that age, didn't seem to internalize their criticism. She remained confident, talented, and unapologetically herself. Maybe that's what made them more determined to dim her light. The real trouble started when Emma entered 5th grade and discovered her love for musical theater. She auditioned for the school's production of Annie Jr. on a whim, never expecting to get a major role. But when the cast list was posted, there was Emma's name next to Annie. She called me from the school office, breathless with excitement. Mom, I got Annie. I'm going to be the lead." I could hear the joy bubbling over in her voice, and my heart swelled with pride. This was my daughter's moment, her chance to shine, and no one was going to take it away from her. Or so I thought. When I told my mother and Lisa about Emma's role, their reactions were measured. "Oh, how nice," my mother said. "I hope she doesn't get overwhelmed by all that responsibility." Lisa's response was even more telling. "Wow, the lead role in 5th grade. That's a lot of pressure. I hope she can handle it without getting a big head." There it was again, the assumption that Emma's success was somehow dangerous, that her confidence needed be managed and contained. But Emma was oblivious to their concerns. She threw herself into rehearsals with the kind of passion and dedication that made my heart sing. Every evening she'd practice her songs and lines, transforming our living room into her stage. David and I would sit on the couch, our own personal audience of 2, watching our daughter bloom before our eyes. Tomorrow, I love ya tomorrow," she'd belt out, her voice getting stronger and more polished with each rehearsal. "You're always a day away." Those were some of the happiest evenings of my life, watching Emma discover her talent, seeing her gain confidence with each performance, witnessing the pure joy she found in entertaining others. It was everything I dreamed of for my daughter. The school production was a huge success. Emma was radiant on stage, commanding attention and delivering her lines with perfect timing. She got not one but two standing ovations, and the local newspaper even ran a small article about the young star who had captivated audiences with her portrayal of Anne. I thought that would be the end of it. Emma had found her passion, proven her talent, and earned recognition for her hard work. But I was naive to think my family would simply celebrate her success. A few weeks after the school play, my mother called with what seemed like exciting news. "Sarah, honey, I've been thinking. Emma is so talented, and she seemed to love being on stage. There's a wonderful community theater group here in Grand Rapids that does productions with children. Maybe she could come spend the summer with us and audition for one of their shows." At first I was touched. It seemed like my mother was finally embracing Emma's talent, wanting to nurture it rather than diminish it. "That's so generous, Mom," I said. "Let me talk to David and Emma about it." But when I mentioned the idea to David that night, he frowned. "I don't know, Sarah. Remember what they did to you growing up? Do we really want to put Emma in that environment for an entire summer?" "But maybe they've changed," I said. Though even as I spoke the words, I wasn't entirely convinced. "Maybe seeing Emma's talent will make them proud instead of threatened." David took my hand. "Or maybe they'll do to her what they did to you. Are you willing to risk that?" I wanted to believe that my mother and Lisa had changed, that they could love and support Emma without needing to tear her down. But deep in my heart, I knew David was right to be concerned. I called my mother back the next day and politely declined the summer theater camp idea. I made up an excuse about Emma having local commitments, but I could hear the disappointment in my mother's voice. "Well, of course you know what's best for Emma," she said, in that tone that suggested she thought the opposite. "I just hate to see such talent go to waste." The implications stung. By keeping Emma home, I was somehow failing her, denying her opportunities that only my mother and Lisa could provide. But I stood firm, and I'm glad I did, because what happened next showed me exactly what my family was capable of when they felt threatened by someone else's success. It was early spring when Emma's music teacher, Mrs. Johnson, approached her about auditioning for the district's annual talent showcase. This was a big deal. Kids from all over the county would compete, and the winners would advance to the state level. Emma was beside herself with excitement. She'd been working on a solo version of Tomorrow that showcased her voice beautifully, and Mrs. Johnson thought she had a real chance of winning her age category. "Can I do it, Mom? Please?" "Mrs. Johnson says I'm one of the best young singers she's ever worked with." How could I say no to that face, those bright eyes full of hope and ambition? Emma had found something she loved, something she was genuinely gifted at, and I wasn't going to let anyone, including my own family, take that away from her. "Of course you can audition," I told her. "We'll work on your song every day until you're ready." And we did. For 3 weeks, Emma and I practiced together every evening. I helped her with her stage presence, her breathing, her emotional connection to the lyrics. David built her a small platform in our basement where she could practice performing on a stage. Emma's confidence grew with each rehearsal. She was no longer just singing a song, she was becoming a performer. And watching her transform was like watching a butterfly emerge from its cocoon. The night before the district auditions, Emma could barely contain her excitement. "Mom, what if I actually win? What if I make it to state? Then we'll be the proudest parents in Ohio," I told her. "But even if you don't win, I'm already proud of how hard you've worked." Emma hugged me tight. "I love you, Mom. Thanks for believing in me." Those words still echo in my mind, especially when I think about what happened next. I made the mistake of calling my mother to tell her about Emma's upcoming audition. I thought she'd want to know, thought she might even offer some encouragement. "Oh, that sounds lovely, dear," my mother said. "Lisa and I were actually thinking of coming for a visit soon. Maybe we could come see Emma audition." My stomach clenched, but I couldn't think of a polite way to say no. "Of course," I heard myself saying. "Emma would love to have you there." But even as I spoke, I felt a sense of foreboding. Something told me that their presence wouldn't be the supportive gesture it appeared to be. They arrived 2 days before the audition, and at first, everything seemed normal. They praised Emma's singing, complimented her stage presence, and even helped her pick out the perfect outfit for the competition. But I started noticing small things. The way Lisa would interrupt Emma mid-song to offer helpful suggestions. The way my mother would comment on other young performers. They'd seen always finding ways to point out how much more natural or polished those other children were. "You know, Emma," Lisa said one evening, as we sat around the dinner table, "I saw a video online of a girl about your age singing this same song. She had such a unique interpretation, very subtle and understated. Sometimes less is more, you know." Emma's face fell slightly. "Do you think I'm doing too much?" "Oh no, honey," Lisa said quickly. "You're doing fine. I just think it's important to remember that the judges will be looking for authenticity, not flashiness." I wanted to speak up, to tell Lisa that Emma's interpretation was perfect just as it was, but old habits kicked in, and I found myself staying silent, not wanting to cause a scene. The night before the audition, Emma was unusually quiet during dinner. She picked at her food and kept glancing nervously at Lisa and my mother. "Are you feeling okay, sweetheart?" David asked. "I'm just nervous," Emma said. "What if I'm not as good as I think I am? What if the judges think I'm showing off?" My heart broke a little. This was my confident, talented daughter. And somehow in just a few days, my family had managed to plant seeds of doubt in her mind. "Emma," I said firmly, "you are every bit as good as you think you are. Your voice is beautiful, your performance is authentic, and you have every right to be proud of your talent." I saw Lisa and my mother exchange another one of their looks, but for once I didn't care. This was about Emma, not their comfort level with her success. The morning of the audition, Emma woke up early and spent extra time getting ready. She wore her favorite dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked beautiful and professional. "I'm ready, Mom," she said as we gathered our things to leave. "Whatever happens, I know I did my best." That's my girl, I thought. Confident, prepared, and gracious. Everything I'd never been allowed to be at her age. The audition was held at the high school auditorium, and the waiting area was filled with nervous children and their families. Emma seemed to draw energy from the atmosphere, chatting easily with other young performers and wishing them luck. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage with her head held high. The piano introduction began, and Emma started to sing. From the first note, I knew she was giving the performance of her life. Her voice was clear and strong, her stage presence commanding. She wasn't just singing the song, she was living it, feeling it, making the audience believe in tomorrow along with her. When she finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. The judges were smiling, other parents were nodding appreciatively, and Emma was glowing with the satisfaction of a job well done. She practically skipped off the stage and into my arms. "Mom, did you hear that applause? I think it went really well. It was perfect, baby. Absolutely perfect." And it was. Emma had not only sung beautifully, she had commanded that stage with the confidence and skill of someone much older. I was so proud I could barely contain myself. But when I looked over at my mother and Lisa, their expressions were complicated. They were smiling, but the smiles didn't reach their eyes. They clapped politely when Emma came to greet them, but their praise felt forced. "Very nice, dear," my mother said. "Very energetic." "You certainly weren't holding back," Lisa added with a laugh that sounded more nervous than amused. I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. Emma had done beautifully, and that's all that mattered. When the results were announced, an hour later, Emma's name was called, first in her age category. She had not only that, but she'd done the highest score of any performer in the elementary division. Emma burst into tears of joy and threw her arms around me. David lifted her up and spun her around while she clutched her trophy. Other parents came over to congratulate us, praising Emma's performance and asking about her training. For a few precious minutes, we basked in the glow of Emma's success. She had worked hard, taken a risk, and been rewarded for her talent and dedication. It was everything a parent could hope for. But then I noticed that my mother and Lisa had quietly excused themselves and were standing by the exit, clearly ready to leave. "Aren't you going to congratulate Emma?" I asked when I caught up to them. "Of course," my mother said, but her tone was, "It's just getting late, and we have a long drive tomorrow." Lisa nodded. "Besides, Emma's probably overwhelmed with all the attention. We don't want to add to the chaos." But Emma wasn't overwhelmed. She was radiant, graciously accepting congratulations from strangers and posing for pictures with her trophy. She was handling her success with more grace than many adults I knew. As we drove home that night, Emma chattered excitedly about the competition, about advancing to state, about all the possibilities that lay ahead. David and I exchanged proud glances in the front seat, our hearts full of love for our incredible daughter. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the image of my mother and Lisa's faces when Emma's name was announced as the winner. They had looked almost disappointed. The next morning, my mother and Lisa packed their bags early and left before Emma woke up. They claimed they wanted to get on the road before traffic got heavy, but they'd never been early risers before. I found a note on the kitchen counter from my mother. "Congratulations to Emma on her win. We're proud of her. Please don't let all this attention go to her head. Love, Mom and Lisa." Even in a congratulatory note, they couldn't resist including a warning, a reminder that Emma's success was somehow dangerous and needed to be managed. I crumpled up the note and threw it away before Emma could see it. Over the next few weeks, as Emma prepared for the state competition, my mother and Lisa's calls became less frequent. When they did call, they seemed distracted, their questions about Emma's progress perfunctory. But I was too focused on helping Emma prepare to worry much about my family's strange behavior. Emma was working with a voice coach now, polishing her performance for the state level, and every day brought new improvements. The state competition was incredible. Emma performed even better than she had at districts, and while she didn't win at the state level, she placed third out of nearly 100 contestants. For an 11-year-old with no formal training, it was an extraordinary achievement. When I called to share the news, my mother's response was lukewarm at best. "Third place. That's nice," she said. At least she didn't get too disappointed about not winning. "Mom, she placed third in the entire state. She's thrilled." "Well, I'm sure she is. I just hope this doesn't make her think she's better than other children her age." There it was again, the assumption that Emma's success was somehow problematic, that her achievements needed to be diminished rather than celebrated. I got off the phone feeling frustrated and hurt. Why couldn't my own mother simply be happy for her granddaughter? Why did every achievement have to come with a warning label? But I pushed those feelings aside and focused on Emma. She was on cloud 9, already talking about next year's competition and the possibility of taking voice lessons. Her confidence was soaring, and I wasn't going to let anyone bring her down. That summer, Emma was invited to participate in a prestigious youth theater program in Columbus. It was a 6-week intensive that would culminate in a full production, and Emma was beyond excited. When I mentioned the program to my mother, her reaction was immediate and strong. 6 weeks? Don't you think that's a bit much? Emma's only 11. She should be playing with dolls and riding bikes, not pursuing some intense theater program. Mom, this is what Emma loves. This is her passion. Passions can become obsessions, Sarah. I just worry that all this focus on performing is making Emma too serious, too focused on herself. I realized then that my mother wasn't concerned about Emma becoming too serious. She was concerned about Emma becoming too confident, too sure of her own worth and abilities. Emma thrived in the theater program. She made friends with kids who shared her passion, learned from professional instructors, and gained skills that would serve her for years to come. When I picked her up on the last day, she was practically glowing with satisfaction and accomplishment. "Mom, this was the best summer ever," she said, as we drove home. "I learned so much, and I made so many friends. Can I do it again next year? We'll see, baby. Let's see how everything goes." But I was already planning to sign her up for the following summer. This program had been exactly what Emma needed, a place where her talent was nurtured, where her confidence was seen as an asset rather than a liability. When we got home, there was a message on our answering machine from Lisa. "Hi Sarah, Mom and I were talking, and we're a bit concerned about Emma. We know she's been doing all these performance things, and we just want to make sure she's not losing sight of what's really important. Being a normal kid, focusing on school, not getting too caught up in all the attention and praise. Maybe we could come for a visit soon and spend some time with her. You know, remind her that there's more to life than being on stage. Call us back." The message made my blood boil. There it was, laid out in black and white, their belief that Emma's talent and passion were somehow unhealthy, that her success needed to be tempered with reminders of her place. But what really got to me was the phrase "normal kid," as if Emma's love of performing made her abnormal, as if her confidence and talent were character flaws rather than gifts. I didn't call them back right away. Instead, I talked to David. "They want to come balance Emma," I told him. "They want to remind her not to get too caught up in her own success." David's jaw tightened. "What's wrong with Emma being caught up in her success? She's worked hard for it. She deserves to feel proud." That's what I keep trying to tell them, but they act like her confidence is dangerous, like she's going to turn into some kind of monster if we don't constantly humble her. "Sarah," David said seriously, "you need to make a choice here. Either you protect Emma from their negativity, or you let them do to her what they did to you. There's no middle ground." He was right, but the thought of confronting my family, of potentially burning bridges, terrified me. I'd spent my whole life trying to keep the peace, trying to manage everyone's feelings and expectations. But Emma wasn't me. She was strong, confident, and talented, and she deserved to grow up believing in herself, rather than constantly second-guessing her worth. I made a decision that night. I called my mother back and told her that while they were welcome to visit, Emma's performing schedule was non-negotiable. "She's found something she loves and excels at," I said. "We're going to support that, not discourage it." My mother's silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "Sarah," she finally said, "I hope you know what you're doing. Children who get too much praise, too much attention, often struggle later in life. They can't handle it when they're not the center of attention anymore. Emma's not getting too much praise, Mom. She's getting the recognition she's earned through hard work and talent. If you say so, dear. We'll plan to visit in a few weeks." But they never did visit. Something always came up. Lisa had work commitments. My mother wasn't feeling well. The weather was bad for driving. The excuses piled up, and slowly I began to realize that their absence might actually be a blessing. Without their constant subtle criticism and warnings, Emma continued to flourish. She joined the middle school choir, auditioned for the spring musical, and even started writing her own songs. Her confidence remained intact, her joy in performing undimmed. Which brings me to the real story I want to tell you. The story of Emma's 5th grade talent show, and the night my family finally went too far. It was early May, and Emma's elementary school was preparing for their annual spring talent showcase. Unlike the district competition, this was just a fun, low-pressure event where kids could share their talents with their families and classmates. Emma decided to perform tomorrow again, since it had served her so well in competitions. But this time, she wanted to add choreography, make it more of a complete performance rather than just a song. She worked on it for weeks, practicing in our living room, perfecting every gesture and movement. David and I watched her rehearse night after night, marveling at how she could make us believe in the hope and optimism of the song every single time. "You know what," David said one evening, after a particularly beautiful run-through, "I think this might be your best performance yet." Emma beamed. "Really? I feel like I'm finally getting the emotion right. Mrs. Johnson says the best performers don't just sing songs. They tell stories." And that's exactly what Emma was doing. She wasn't just performing tomorrow. She was sharing a story of hope, resilience, and the belief that better days were always possible. A week before the talent show, I made what would turn out to be a crucial mistake. I called my mother to tell her about Emma's upcoming performance. "Oh, how lovely," my mother said. "You know, Lisa and I haven't seen Emma perform in person for so long. Maybe we could come watch." Every instinct I had screamed no, but I couldn't think of a polite way to refuse. They were Emma's grandmother and aunt. Of course they should be welcome at her school performance. "Sure," I said reluctantly. It's next Friday night at 7. Wonderful. We'll drive down that afternoon. It'll be so nice to see our little performer in action. The way she said little performer, with just a hint of condescension, should have been warning enough, but I chose to ignore it, hoping against hope that this time would be different. They arrived Friday afternoon, just as Emma was getting home from her final dress rehearsal. She was buzzing with excitement, eager to share every detail of the preparation with her grandmother and aunt. "Grandma, Aunt Lisa," she called out as she ran to hug them. "Wait until you hear my song tonight. Mrs. Patterson says I sound like a professional." I watched my mother and Lisa's faces carefully, looking for signs of genuine pride and excitement. What I saw instead was that familiar tightness around their eyes, the forced quality of their smiles. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mother said. "Just remember, the most important thing is to have fun, not to worry about impressing anyone." Even that seemingly innocuous comment contained a subtle message. Don't try too hard. Don't aim too high. Don't expect too much. But Emma, thankfully, was too excited to pick up on the subtext. She spent the afternoon giving them a preview of her performance, singing her heart out in our living room while they watched with what I hoped was genuine appreciation. As we got ready to leave for the school, Emma put on her special performance outfit, a bright yellow dress that reminded everyone of sunshine. Just like the song she was singing, she looked absolutely radiant. "I can't wait for everyone to hear my song," she said as we walked to the car. "I think I'm really ready." "You're more than ready, baby," I told her. "You're going to be amazing." The school multi-purpose room was packed with families, the atmosphere festive and supportive. Emma's name was about halfway through the program, which gave us time to settle in and watch some of the other performances. There was a group of kindergartners doing a cute dance to the wheels on the bus, a third grader playing "Mary Had a Little Lamb" on the violin, and twin brothers who performed a comedy skit that had everyone laugh. Emma watched it all with genuine appreciation, applauding enthusiastically for every performer. That's one of the things I've always loved about my daughter, her ability to celebrate other people's successes without feeling threatened or diminished by them. "Look how supportive Emma is," I whispered to David. "She's genuinely happy for everyone else." "That's because she's secure in her own abilities," David whispered back. "She doesn't need to tear others down to feel good about herself." I glanced over at my mother and Lisa, wondering if they'd heard our exchange. They were sitting stiffly in their chairs, politely applauding each act, but without Emma's genuine enthusiasm. When Emma's name was finally called, she practically bounced out of her seat. She gave us all quick hugs, whispered, "Wish me luck," and headed backstage to wait for her turn. The act before Emma was a group of fourth-grade girls doing a dance routine to a popular song. They were cute and enthusiastic, and the audience responded warmly. As they took their bows and left the stage, I felt my heart start to race with anticipation. Then the curtain opened, and there was Emma, standing center stage in her yellow dress, looking like a ray of sunshine under the bright lights. She waited for her music to begin, and I could see her taking the deep breath we'd practiced together. The opening notes of "Tomorrow" filled the auditorium, and Emma began to sing. From the very first word, I knew this was going to be special. Her voice was stronger and more controlled than I'd ever heard it, her stage presence commanding and natural. She moved through the song with confidence and grace, hitting every note perfectly, conveying the hope and optimism of the lyrics with genuine emotion. The audience was completely captivated. I could see people leaning forward in their seats, smiling at Emma's performance. As she reached the final chorus, building to the climactic high note, I felt tears of pride stinging my eye. This was my daughter, my beautiful, talented daughter, sharing her gift with the world and doing it with such joy and confidence. The last note rang out clear and true, and for a moment, the auditorium was completely silent. Then the applause erupted, not just polite clapping, but genuine, enthusiastic applause. People were actually giving her a standing ovation. Emma's face lit up with pure joy as she took her bow. She looked out into the audience, found our row, and waved at us with a smile that could have powered the entire school. I was clapping so hard my hands hurt, tears streaming down my face. David was whistling and cheering, and even some of the other parents were turning to us with congratulatory smiles. But when I looked at my mother and Lisa, my heart sank. They were clapping, but reluctantly, their faces tight with what looked almost like displeasure. Emma bounded off the stage and straight into my arms, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom, did you hear that applause? I think they really liked it. They loved it, sweetheart. You were absolutely magnificent." Emma hugged David, then turned to my mother and Lisa, clearly expecting the same enthusiastic response. "Grandma, did you like my song?" My mother's smile looked forced. "It was very nice, dear. Very loud. Loud." Of all the words she could have chosen to describe Emma's beautiful, professional quality performance, she chose loud. Lisa nodded in agreement. "You certainly have a big voice, Emma. Maybe next time you could try something a little more subtle." I watched Emma's face fall slightly, the joy dimming in her eyes. She was 11 years old. She had just given the performance of her life to a standing ovation, and instead of celebrating her achievement, her own family members were criticizing her for being too much. "I thought I sounded good," Emma said quietly, and I heard the uncertainty creeping into her voice. "You did sound good, baby," I said firmly, shooting a warning look at my mother and Lisa. "You sounded incredible, but the damage was already done." Emma spent the rest of the evening more subdued, second-guessing herself in a way I hadn't seen since she was much younger.